there is a need now to broaden our scope of education. Education has gone towards a stage, I mean particularly university education, to a state where we specialize inordinately very early and specialize in fields. We absolutely lose our contact with the broader canvas. And so we encourage people to specialize at a very young age. And of course, in some cases in research, they do well as a result because they concentrate on one field for a long, long time. But they absolutely cannot see things in context at all. And here we are talking about somebody who within a scope of 5 years wrote 2 textbooks as disparate as these two, right? I mean, I didn't get the actual cover of the law textbook, so I put it down there, but I actually own Ashutosh Mukherjee's textbook on conic sections, and it's absolutely fantastic book of mathematics. He wrote it while he was a professor of law at Calcutta University, referring back to his original passion of mathematics. And then, in the same breath, he writes a textbook on law. Now, how many academicians would actually be able to do that now? Do you even think that is relevant? And I think it is very, 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 very relevant. And that is why I think one of the things that we have to do to engage the young mind, even in university education, is to bring about a concept of liberal arts or liberal sciences education. We have to broaden the scope and let people explore the connections between subjects. We specialize in doing science, for example, at the higher secondary level, and then you go on to do physics, chemistry, mathematics, etc. in universities, and but then you don't explore what the connections are between subjects at all. Whereas this is the era of interdisciplinarity in education, in research. We are talking of biophysics, whereas in my university, for example, and all the universities in the state and most universities in India, a physicist is not allowed to actually read biological subjects in university, right? Whereas the growth area in the 21st century is biophysics. That's giving an example, right? So here we are talking about somebody here who actually went in and looked at the possibilities of acquiring people for Calcutta University who are from a variety of backgrounds. Looking at, Sir Ashutosh as Vice Chancellor, a leader of a university, it was just remarkable to see the things he had brought about. And I think there is a lesson to take in every aspect of his work as a leader of Calcutta University. And I've chosen a few points there just to show what we need now in terms of engaging the young minds who are coming into our universities nowadays, without whom, as Professor Rajan said very rightly, there is no hope that we can actually compete in the emerging world in the next 20, 30 years. There is a chance India will now emerge as on the top with China, on the top of the academic world, just like the US did in the 70s and the 80s. There is a chance, but it will only happen if we can engage the young mind and not let them escape to other countries and also to other vocations, from university education. So, first of all, as we've heard before, Ashutosh's contribution to education was to introduce teaching in Calcutta University, right? It was only an examination board before then. But then he didn't stop there. He went on to bring in actual research. Because he felt at that time that the teaching, if you want to teach postgraduate education, you have to bring in researchers because people have to be taught by academics who are one notch higher than the students they're teaching, right? So you have to have active researchers who will teach in postgraduate institutions. Why did we lose it? Why did we, after independence in the 50s and 60s and 70s, create universities where no research was done? Why did we separate research from universities completely? It was done in the early 50s. There was a need for it because there was a small number of researchers who needed to be protected. And I think Bhabha and Nehru and people like that did that. But we went through 60, 70 years after independence with universities doing no research. And yet, 100 years ago, Ashutosh Mukherjee had sought top researchers to come and teach at an institution he created out of a degree-granting body. Right? This is where we now must go. We have to realize that our young students now are so sophisticated and information is so readily available that they cannot be taught by textbook-wielding teachers who have no connection with what's happening at the front line of research. That is, it's very important to make universities research active. And this hasn't happened because we have kept universities away from research. I mean, and for that what we want to do, we have to do, and this is what Sir Ashutosh showed us the way for, is we have to go and actually actively acquire scholars to teach at these universities that we are building now. This is exactly what you will hear from my Vice-Chancellor later today. She will be there in the afternoon session. But at Presidency University, where I work, this is exactly what we are trying to do. We are not waiting for people to apply to us so that we can actually consider their applications. We are going all around the world and asking people, I want you to teach at my university. Because I believe that you have the research ability that you can inspire the students the best students who are going into presidency. Right? And this needs to happen not just at presidency, it needs to happen at the national level and certainly at the state level. What did Sir Ashutosh do? He was the most unusual person in terms of, in the way he worked. He actually attracted the youngest people, fresh PhDs, as faculty at the university, unheard of. Right? So Satyendra Ghosh and Meghnad Shah were fresh out of university, and posts were created for them so that they could come and teach at the newly formed University College of Science, and a lot of the younger people were then inducted into teaching at the university. He went for people from very unconventional backgrounds. C.V. Raman was an accountants general, right? And he did only his physics research in the evening, out of hours. Sir Ashutosh had the vision to actually realize that this guy can be the Palit professor. And then, and that is very important in the current context, he went outside the state. Raman was actually in Calcutta at that time. Radhakrishnan, for example, had written a book on Tagore in the early 1920s, and he was a young philosopher who just moved from Presidency College Madras to the University of Mysore as their professor of philosophy. And within a year, Sir Ashutosh had grabbed him from Mysore and brought him to Calcutta University as the George V Professor of Philosophy in 1922. And some of Radhakrishnan's best work was done here at Calcutta University. Now, where is that happening in West Bengal? Where are we going out of West Bengal to go and grab the best scholars from all over the country to come and work in Calcutta? In the state universities, the state is such that classes are taken in Bangla because we actually assume that everybody, the teachers and students who are present, are all local. There's nobody from outside the state. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but we have lost the connection with the rest of India because nobody wants to come to Calcutta. And also, it's assumed, it's absolutely assumed that nobody would want to leave, say, Bangalore or Pune or Delhi and actually want to come to Calcutta. Why should we actually, why did we let this happen to our institutions? Right? There was one time when people came from all over the world, all over the country to come to Calcutta. And Ashutosh made that possible. He was grabbing the best professors from all over the country to come here, right? So that's, and then the other thing he did was he was flexible. He was very flexible. He was, he's legendary in terms of skirting bureaucracy to make things happen. And this is how he could actually employ young people in professorial positions, right? I mean, we've heard of how, for example, when Netaji Subhash Bose was thrown out of Presidency College, it was Ashutosh Mukherjee who tried to get him back, and through his help, he went and got into Scottish Church College. Now, why would a Vice-Chancellor do that? Right? And of course, this accessibility, this flexibility is lampooned in many places. People thought he was, he was kind of comically accessible. I mean, one good example, I thought today we are talking about serious things completely. Let me give you one example where Sir Ashutosh, I don't know whether anybody's guessed who I'm talking about. Sir Ashutosh was lampooned in Rajshekhar Bose's famous short story, Kochi Sangshad. If you remember, Palaram Rai changes his name to Pelab Rai, cuts his mustache and dresses as a very effeminate person, then goes to Calcutta University to change his name to Pelab Rai. And then the line is, Sir Ashutosh, ek volume encyclopedia loiya tahake tara korilen. Right? The fact that a student actually goes to the vice chancellor and asks the name to be changed on the university register is a lampooning of something that was already known. The fact that this man could actually bend rules or go around bureaucracy if he needed to. And he did that. He actually did that in many cases to actually get his job done. Otherwise, there is no way, if you get bogged down in bureaucracy, you will be able to actually make your vision fruitful. And this is something that we have to remember. I mean, one of the things that I've come from outside the system, for example, and trying to build a department at Presidency University, and one of the first things that I see every day is the total resignation of people to bureaucracy, saying this can't be done, this can't be done, this can't be done, this can't be done, because the law says so, or some rule book says so. And Sir Ashutosh showed us actually in many ways how to get around that. And of course, the most important thing that we need in university education today, and that's been referred to in many places today already, several people have mentioned it, is private sector investment. And there, of course, Sir Ashutosh was absolute pioneer, right? We know, actually, at that point, he needed it because the British government would not fund his notion of upgrading the university into a research university, right? So he straight went to the public sector. Similarly, at the private sector. Similarly, we have come to a phase now where it is very difficult in academia to get money for aspects of education that don't please politicians, that are not beneficial for politicians, right? And that is why we have to get to the private sector. I mean, this is a quote from Sir Ashutosh's first presidential address at the Indian National Science Congress, which he started, right? He started the Indian National Science Congress, and the very first, and where he actually started by referring to William Jones and his Asiatic Society and said, from now, I mean, till now, our principal inspiration has been the Asiatic Society and its research in the sciences, but from now on, we have to do applied sciences. And he gives an example, for example, we have to go to the landed gentry and show them how research into agriculture can actually help them gain money. And that is why they should fund the research. Can you believe that this is 1914? It's absolutely amazing. That is far more relevant now than it was 100 years ago. You would have thought, why did this man think about this 100 years ago, right? It is amazing. And this is where this meeting is so important at the Chamber of Commerce. That the time has come now when in a big way, education, research has to be funded from the private sector. And that is not because of philanthropic reasons, because the research at the universities has a lot to give back to industry, has a lot to give back to agriculture and various things. And of course, Sir Ashutosh succeeded. I mean, I just give an example of how, well, we know that Taraknath Palit and Rajbihari Ghosh gave the money to build the entire University Science College and then its positions. Here's another example. Here's from my field. I'm an astronomer. Shishir Kumar Mitra is probably one of the first astrophysicists or atmospheric physicists in Bengal. And he, in the 1920s, was studying in France, and he came across this new science, radio sciences, by which one could actually study the effect of the sun on the upper atmosphere, which he was interested in. Of course, this is the technology that will would later, during the Second World War, evolve into radar technology. And he came across this, and he wrote back immediately to Sir Ashutosh saying that I would like an Institute of Radio Sciences to be set up in Calcutta. And Ashutosh immediately wrote back saying, I think this is very important. Why didn't you come back? You give me a proposal, make it inexpensive. That's amazing, really. Make it inexpensive. Make it such that you don't spend too much money, and I will make sure it will happen. And he did. As soon as Shishir Kumar Mitra came back, he was appointed the Koira professor, and from the Koira money, he got a lab, right? Which was exactly what his proposal was. And Shishir Kumar Mitra is the father of radio sciences in India, right? And that's just one example. And then, another thing that hasn't been talked about now is how he realized that the Northeast had so much potential. You should not forget that, founding of Dhaka University, Sir Ashutosh had a big hand in, but also going beyond Dhaka, going to the entire Northeast. Education in Assam was still under Calcutta University, and Sir Ashutosh helped it a lot. Assamese as a language started to be studied in Calcutta University under Sir Ashutosh's patronage. And also, all the major colleges, Cotton College in Guwahati, which has now become a university like my university and things like that, their flourishing was a lot due to Ashutosh. And that is very, very relevant now. I think one of the things we need to do in this region is to tap the potential of the Northeast. The Northeast is largely untapped. There's a lot of educational potential, research potential in the entire Northeast region. When we are talking about how, Professor Marjit said, what is the fraction of people who get to higher education all over India, we are lagging a lot behind. In Bengal, we are lagging a lot behind. Look at the Northeast, what's happening there. And there is so much talent there. And just because there isn't enough resources for higher education. And, again, 100 years ago, this man actually realized that. And finally, I have to point you to the fact that Sir Ashutosh actually was responsible for building some of the major institutions that we now take for granted. And I think that is one of the major things that we need to think about in looking at educating the future mind. There have been institutions, universities, colleges for decades and hundreds of years. But if we have to rethink education and make it more relevant to the young people so that they can come and get its full advantage, we have to redesign our institutions. Just like Sir Ashutosh came to Calcutta University and said, okay, this is a degree-granting university, let's make it into a research institution, into a teaching institution. We have to grab our existing institutions and ask the question, is it still relevant in its current form? Or should we change it such that it is better used? Again, I give an example from what we are doing at Presidency College, turning it into a research active university. We are about to start a liberal arts education there from July. From next week, the students who are going to come in will have the freedom to study any subject. They will major in one subject, but they can, in the first 2 years, pick 10 papers from any subject, including arts and sciences. And we're going to completely break the barriers between subjects. From next week, I will teach, for example, a course on astrophysics, together with our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Malavika Sarkar, who is a specialist in Milton, and we are to look at how astronomy influenced medieval literature. And we're going to teach a course on this. Now, this is not available anywhere in India, but we have decided this is how we are going to do. We are going to make sure that our students come out of the university with a very broad education, and they see the connections between subjects, right? That is what we need to do, to rethink institutions. So here are some examples, like the University College of Science, the Rajabajar campus. I mean, it was entirely Sir Ashutosh's brainchild, and universities never did research then, right? So we have to think now what we need to do to turn our current institutions into what's relevant in educating the future mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Raychaudhuri. We are already late by more than 1 hour, so we need to hand over the dais to the other speakers. So let me summarize it in a very brief way. Professor Y.S. Rajan had given a very exciting lecture on the work of Professor Ashutosh Mukherjee. He tried to give a proper shape to the motivating role of Sir Ashutosh in illustrating the work of the person in all dimensions of learning. He described the analytical notations of educating the minds of young people. He categorized the period of growth in higher learning and described the contributions of Sir Ashutosh in education. He highlighted the role of higher education regulators in present-day scenario of higher education and stressed the need for autonomy in universities. He talked about mindset of people and stressed for motivating young mind for higher education. He expressed hope for a better future, brighter future of Indian young people in higher education. Professor Raychaudhuri stressed to look at the vision of Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee in present day scenario. He highlighted the intellectual works of Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee. He cited the problem of young scholars and researchers in interdisciplinary studies, and he also stressed the need for engage young minds in teaching and research. Professor Raychaudhuri stressed for autonomy of higher education, and also he talked about the requirement of private sector funding in higher education. So I thank you all, the participants and delegates who have given a patient hearing to the deliberations of two famous and distinguished professors. I thank you all and I conclude the session. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. We would now request Dr. R.P. Banerjee to hand over the mementos on behalf of Bengal Chamber to our distinguished panelists. First to Mr. Y.S. Rajan. Would now request Dr. Banerjee to hand over to Sri Abhijit Chakraborty. To Mr. Shomok Raychaudhuri. And to Mr. Ashok Mukherjee. Thank you, sir. Now I would request Ashok Mukherjee to hand over mementos on behalf of EIRC of ICAI to our panelists. Thank you. With this, we are starting off with our next session and would request Dr. Partho Ghosh and Dr. R.P. Banerjee to be on the dais, please. I would
Good afternoon, everybody. We are starting this panel discussion session 2. We have with us Dr. Partho Ghosh. He will be speaking first. I'm moderating. Then after Dr. Ghosh's talk is over, I'll have some, remaining part of my talks, which I told in the beginning. To the later part of that, I'll, add up to that. So the title of this topic is Developing an Integral Personality, the Vision of Sir Ashutosh Mukhopadhyay. I invite Dr. Ghosh to speak first. Dr. Ghosh.
I would like to start off by thanking the Bengal Chamber of Commerce for inviting me to this august occasion. I must admit that over the last few weeks I was extremely busy with something else, connected with integral personality development, and then I fell sick. So I would like to start off on an apologetic note by saying I do not have a presentation of the kind which the previous speakers had, so I'll be rambling a little bit. In fact, whatever I'll be saying will be a ramble. You have to pardon me for that. Now, we've heard in the morning that Sir Ashutosh had this tremendous power to synthesize various things. He was a mathematician par excellence. He was a lawyer and judge par excellence. He was a builder of institutions par excellence. Bengal had many such people at one time. There was Sir Ashutosh, before that there was Swami Vivekananda, there was Rabindranath Tagore. Somehow or other, we've lost that. As Professor Raychaudhuri was saying, a lot of things were begun in Bengal which somehow got lost. Now, I am not a historian, so I'm not going to go into any historical reasons for that. But the fact is, it is acutely felt today that we have lost research from universities, we have lost integrally developed human beings. Instead, we have created robots. Our entire education system is geared towards producing robots who cannot think, who are only to be guided by their employers or whoever that may be. When I use the word employer, I mean in a larger sense of the word. Now, just after I came in, I heard Justice Chittatosh Mukhopadhyay just touch on the point that Sir Ashutosh did not forget schools. And this is a point I'm going to emphasize today. I think the personality, the mind, everything is actually built in a school, at the school level. It is